Welcome to today's Explainer. I am honestly so incredibly excited to guide you through this one because we're looking at what might literally be the ultimate medical mystery of our time. We're talking about the human brain, how it ages, and most importantly, how our own genetics might just hold the secret to a built-in shield against cognitive decline. So get ready, because we're going to unpack some fascinating new research that completely changes how we view brain health. Okay, let's dive right into this. Why do some people naturally resist Alzheimer's disease? I mean, have you ever wondered about that? You hear these amazing stories of people living well into their 90s or even past 100, and their minds are just as sharp as a tack. They seem to walk through life completely immune to the devastating cognitive decline that affects so many others. Well, for the longest time, scientists have been desperately trying to figure out what gives these individuals their, neurological armor. And recently, researchers have found a massive clue. It all comes down to a very specific suspect in this biological cold case. Part 1. The Genetic Mystery. So right at the center of our story is a gene called APOE. Now, traditionally, if you opened up a biology textbook, the APOE gene, which stands for apolipoprotein E, by the way, is mostly famous for being a sort of molecular delivery truck. Its main job is just ferrying cholesterol and fats throughout the body. But scientists noticed that this little fat-ferrying gene actually has a massive, undeniable link to Alzheimer's disease. And that's because it comes in different versions or variants. Think of them almost like the protagonist and the antagonist of our story. On one side, we've got the APOE2 variant. People who carry APOE2 tend to live longer, and they have a much, much lower risk of developing dementia. It's basically our biological hero. But then, on the flip side, we have the APOE4 variant. Carrying this version comes with a significantly higher risk of Alzheimer's. So we've actually known for years that having APOE2 is kind of like holding a winning lottery ticket for brain health. But here's the thing. Despite knowing that, the sheer frustration for scientists was palpable. Chemist Lisa Ellerby over at the Buck Institute perfectly captured it when she said, but the protective mechanism has been a black box. Like, we knew APOE2 was the good guy protecting the brain, but exactly how it pulled off this miraculous protection, that was completely hidden in the dark. Literally a black box. That is, until a team at the Buck Institute decided it was finally time to pry that box wide open. Which brings us to part 2. Inside the black box. To figure out what APOE2 was actually doing in there, researchers had to go incredibly small. I mean, they needed to look directly into the cells themselves to compare how neurons, our brain cells, behaved when they carried these different genetic variants. To do this, they cast a really wide net. First, they actually engineered human stem cells to carry the different APOE variants, so APOE2, APOE3, and the really risky APOE4. Then they coax those stem cells to grow into 2 highly specific essential types of brain cells that are heavily involved in Alzheimer's. We're talking about GABAergic neurons, which calm the brain down, and glutamatergic neurons, which excite and stimulate the brain. Oh, and to make sure what they were seeing wasn't just, some weird fluke happening in a petri dish, they ran parallel studies on the actual brains of elderly mice that were engineered with these exact same genes, the whole shebang.
Now, to actually see what was happening inside these cells, the scientists used a special color staining technique. They basically used a bright green marker to flag DNA damage. This green stain acts like a biological highlighter, visually revealing the hidden wear and tear, that biological weathering that happens to our cells over time from age and stress. By comparing the amount of green stain in the APOE2 cells versus the APOE4 cells, the researchers could literally see the damage accumulating, and what they saw completely blew the lid off the entire mystery.
Part 3. The DNA Defenders. Okay, here's the major plot twist. Remember how I said the APOE gene was famous for just moving fats and cholesterol around? Well, actually, scratch that, because it turns out APOE2 is doing a lot more than just biological traffic control. This variant actually acts as an active, robust defender of the neuron's very own genome. It actively helps keep the DNA inside the neurons completely intact. And understanding what happens when DNA isn't protected, that's absolutely crucial. Unprotected DNA leads to something called senescence. Senescence is a state where a cell basically stops functioning, but it absolutely refuses to die. It just sits there. In the scientific community, these are often nicknamed zombie cells, and they are terrible for the brain because they just sit around secreting these nasty inflammatory signals, causing massive damage to all the healthy cells around them. And studies show the senescence plays a huge driving role in Alzheimer's and late-life cognitive decline. But those neurons carrying the APOE2 gene, they had absolute superpowers against this. And across both the human stem cells and the elderly mouse tissue, the picture was incredibly consistent. The ApoE2 neurons collected far less damage at baseline. They actually built stronger cellular scaffolding. And incredibly, the excitatory neurons even boosted their emergency response and repair processes, so they could fix DNA damage way faster. So because of all this, these ApoE2 neurons showed a massive resistance to turning into those dangerous senescent zombie cells. They don't just sit there and take the damage, they actively fight it off and recover faster when they're stressed. It's a real game changer.
Section 4, the Alzheimer's antidote.
So naturally, the researchers at the Buck Institute ask the million-dollar question. If ApoE2 is really this powerful of a shield, what happens if we take the vulnerable, highly damaged ApoE4 cells and actually give them a dose of this protective protein? Like, can we rescue them? Let's walk through exactly what they did here. Step 1, they isolated those high-risk, highly stressed ApoE4 neurons in the lab. Step 2, they treated those vulnerable cells directly with the ApoE2 protein. And Step 3, the results. They observed that the ApoE2 protein actually helped protect the ApoE4 neurons against damage. I mean, this is a massive revelation. It suggests that if we can just figure out how to deliver or even mimic this ApoE2 protein, we might actually have a direct therapeutic option to protect vulnerable brains.
Now, to be fair, as an enthusiastic but responsible explainer, I do have to point out an important scientific caveat presented in the research. The brain cells studied in these lab tests were deliberately stressed. The scientists actually used radiation and chemicals to aggressively accelerate the damage so they could measure it. And while that's totally standard for lab work, it obviously doesn't perfectly reflect the natural, slow wear and tear of everyday human brain aging. It's an artificial stressor, right? So we have to remember that this is a model. A very, very promising model for sure, but still just a model.
Part 5, the road ahead. Ultimately, the findings from this research, which were published in the journal Aging Cell, brilliantly illustrate this massive shift happening in dementia research right now. For the longest time, the old view in the APOE field was completely hyper-focused on lipid handling and the toxic accumulation of amyloid beta and tau proteins in the brain. That is literally what you always hear about in dementia treatment. But look at the new frontier. By showing the APOE variants actually tune how neurons defend their own genome, this study connects this major longevity gene to the actual hallmarks of cellular aging itself, DNA repair and fighting senescence. It is a completely new angle of attack.
Which leaves us with this final, genuinely thrilling thought to ponder. So what does the future of dementia treatment look like, now that we're finally looking beyond the traditional targets of amyloid beta and tau proteins? I mean, if scientists can eventually map out the exact step-by-step mechanisms of how ApoE2 performs these miracles, could we one day develop a drug that mimics this exact superpower? Could we theoretically give everyone the biological armor of an ApoE2 carrier? It's a complex but incredibly hopeful future. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this fascinating explainer today. Keep asking questions, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.